In my opinion, every piece of content you put out has one main purpose. It's not to get engagement, it's not to get followers, it's not even to build your personal brand. It's simply to move people, both at an emotional level, you want your content to make people feel something, but also at a practical level, like you want them to take action afterwards, especially when you're trying to sell something. Like, remember, we're not just trying to build any audience, we're trying to build an audience of people who will buy from us. So in this video, I'm going through 5 secrets of persuasive content that can help in both ways. However, instead of just telling you what they are, I thought I would try and show you. When I started my last content business, I thought I'd hit my financial goals within 6 to 12 months. It ended up taking 5 years to get anywhere close. For a very long time, nothing went to plan. It was a case of 1 step forwards, 2 steps back. I'd wonder how other people in the space were so far ahead. Like, what was I doing wrong? What were they doing that I wasn't? It felt like there must be some secret that I just wasn't privy to. I checked my analytics countless times a day, searching desperately for any signs of progress. I remember talking to my dad one day, racked with self-doubt, wondering if it was ever going to work out or if I'd just wasted years of my life. I stuck with it though, partly out of stubbornness, but also because if I'd quit, I'd have had nothing to show for the countless hours I'd poured into the business already. So after 3 years of struggling, I took a risk. I got a loan from the bank of mum and dad. That loan gave me enough money to justify working on the business full-time for 3 months. It wasn't long, but thankfully it was enough. Fast forward a year and I was getting millions of views a month. I had a small team and my revenue hit 6 figures. The doubt I'd felt for so long gave way to relief. I'd still check my analytics all the time, but now it wasn't out of fear or frustration, it was out of excitement. Looking back now, many factors enabled me to build that business, luck being one of them. But ultimately, it's because I didn't quit. From everything I've seen over the last 8 years of being in the content info space, that's the real secret. What separates people who hit their goals from those who don't isn't talent, it's attrition. If you keep going, keep learning, experimenting, and backing yourself, 9 times out of 10, you'll get where you want to go. If you want to speed up that process though, I'm opening 5 spots to join Creative Freedom. This is where we take your skills and turn them into a simple solo 6-figure online business that you can run from anywhere in a few hours a day. If you'd like the details, hit reply and I'll send them over. Cheering you on, Danny. So that was an example of an email I could send to my audience. And in it, I tried to demonstrate these 5 mechanisms that I mentioned in the introduction, which are storytelling, contrast, gaps, and tension, hell and heaven island, pointing at things, and bridging the gap. Now, there's a lot of crossover between each of these, but I'm going to go through each one in turn to try and highlight what they involve and why they're so helpful when it comes to creating more persuasive content. So with that said, let's dive into number 1, which is storytelling. So the first and most obvious thing I did here was tell you a story. Just to be really clear, I'm not an expert at storytelling or any of the stuff I'm going to talk about today for that matter, but storytelling is something that I've been focusing a lot on over the last 12 months, mainly because it's such a useful skill, especially when it comes to trying to build an audience of people who will buy from you. It's actually one of 3 S's that can facilitate sales above and beyond your offer, which are scarcity, status, and story. I'm not going to go through status here because it's outside the scope of the video, but you can learn more about scarcity in my video about the push, which I'll link to somewhere on the screen. As for stories, they're just a really effective vehicle for communicating your insights and ideas. A big part of that is because they're memorable, and a big part of that is because they make you feel something when you hear them. It makes me think a bit of the quote from Maya Angelou, which is like, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So when we kind of encode the insights that we're trying to share in story form, they instantly become much stickier, and they help people make sense of the information inside them too. There's something about stories that sets information in context, like they help key points land, they help us abstract ideas and just understand them in a way that far exceeds just being given the information kind of up front without anything to set them in context. We also like being told stories, so when it comes to getting attention online, that's obviously a big bonus. And from our perspective as the creator or the coach or whoever's producing that content, there's something about stories that are nice and accessible. Like, All of us can tell a story to some extent. And so instead of having to learn anything like a fancy content format or whatever, you can just find a story that captures the point you're trying to make and tell it. In this video, I'm not going to go through any specific strategies or features of good storytelling that I've learned over the last couple of years. But one thing that is worth mentioning is the story arc. Every story begins at point A and it ends somewhere totally different. In other words, good stories create contrast and gaps. And that leads us nicely onto number 2. One of the most important lessons on persuasion that I've come across in the last couple of years is the role that contrast plays. It's kind of one of those things I hadn't really noticed until I learned about it, but then after that I started seeing it everywhere, especially when it came to content that made me want to take some sort of action. You can boil the basic idea of contrast down to 3 words, which is this versus that. But more specifically, like the subtext that's underpinning it is like, this is where you are, that is where you want to be, or this is what you're doing, that is what you should be doing. So a few examples that you might have seen in social media hooks include things like, the old way is dead, in 2026 you have to X, Y, or Z. Before I was insert negative state, like stuck or overweight or unhappy, but when I did X, everything changed. Or most people do X and we do Y. Regardless of how it's done though, like regardless of how contrast is used or what format it takes, the power of it is that it creates a gap. There's space between where people are right now and where they want to be, and it's pointing that out by comparing these two kind of metrics. And the result of that gap is that you create tension in people's minds. And tension obviously isn't very fun. Like our instinct when we're feeling tense is to try and relieve it. We want to get rid of that tension. A good example of that might be a cliffhanger. So authors will leave a cliffhanger at the end of the chapter, and naturally your instinct is to flip the page and keep reading so you find out what happens next. But whatever the context, the kind of fundamental point is that when you have any sense of unresolved tension, you create a level of need, and that need prompts action. So in the story I told earlier, I described where I was for the first few years of my business and all the struggles that went on. And then I told you about where I ended up. That's the story arc, but it's also the gap. So if you resonated with any of the pain that I described and you like the sound of the results that I described after it, it might have created a bit of underlying tension because the kind of subtext is you could be here too. And after that, I present you with an offer that gives you a way out, an opportunity to relieve that tension, a bridge over that gap. But that's something I'm going to get to later. Next, I want to go through 2 of the key concepts that I tried to use to create that sense of contrast, to create the gap, which is Hell and Heaven Island. All of us in the info creator coaching space help people solve problems. Hell Island is basically just a metaphor for the pain and struggles people experience before that happens. It's where they are now, and it's where they want to leave. Whereas Heaven Island is the dream outcome. It's basically the exact opposite. It's everything they want, and it's everything they can attain if they work with you to solve that problem. So by defining Hell and Heaven Island for your specific customers and clients, and then talking about them in your content, you get a really simple but powerful mechanism for creating the contrast and gaps that we've been talking about. So again, in my example earlier, I start by describing Hell Island, various doubts and struggles and setbacks that I experienced while I was growing that business. And then in the second half of the story, I switched to describing Heaven Island. This was the relief and excitement and all the good stuff that came later. And in doing that, I created a gap and maybe the sense of tension that I was mentioning earlier. However, that's not all I was trying to do. I actually came across the concept of Hell and Heaven Island in a book by Travis Sago called Make and Beg to Buy For You. One of the points he makes is that you really want to try and paint a picture in the mind's eye of your audience. Like, for best effect, to truly create this gap and sense of contrast, you really need people to see and experience the stuff that you're describing. And to do that, Sago talks about the importance of pointing at things. So, according to Travis Sago, the most powerful marketing tool that any of us has at our disposal is our index finger. To make our stuff more persuasive, whether it's our offers or our content, we have to point at things. So, you don't just talk about Hell Island in terms of the struggles that people face. You try and describe the symptoms of those struggles, like how those struggles really show up in people's life, stuff that you can point at, stuff that people can see. And it's exactly the same when you're describing Heaven Island. You want people to be able to experience this stuff in their mind's eye when they're consuming your content. For instance, I didn't just tell you that I was full of self-doubt. I described talking to my dad and sharing with him the fear I had about whether or not this would work out or if I just wasted years of my life. I told you that I checked analytics incessantly throughout the day, looking for some small sign of progress. And then later, when I switched to Heaven Island, I then tried to point out the contrast by sharing how, while I was still checking analytics all the time, suddenly it wasn't out of fear or frustration, but out of excitement. When you point at things in this way, you're demonstrating empathy, like you're helping people feel seen and understood, but you're also making Hell and Heaven Island feel much less abstract. And that means people are much more likely to feel and experience that emotional charge, the tension that comes from the contrast and gap between them. From there, all that's left to do is provide a bridge from one side to the other. Bridging the gap just involves making an offer or describing a big idea that lets people relieve the tension that they're feeling. So I tend to think of this as a river, and on one side you've got your customer or client, which is Hell Island, and you're on the other one, which is Heaven Island. And the offer creates a bridge between the two banks. And because of the contrast and the ensuing tension that you've created, your leads now feel much more motivated to cross that bridge, to get to you, to get to the other side. So again, in my example, I mentioned the 5 spots that I was opening up to creative freedom for anyone who wanted to speed up the process of getting results. Like, that was the bridge that I included in that email. As a quick aside, if you're making offers and you want to make sure that they have everything that they need to convert, check out the link to the 10-minute offer unlock that I've put in the description. It's totally free. It takes 10 minutes or less, and it helps you pressure test your offers so you can see whether or not there are any hidden gaps or opportunities that could improve it. In the meantime, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. If you can start telling more stories, leaning into contrast, defining and describing Hell and Heaven Island, pointing at how they show up in people's lives, and then bridging the gap between them with your offers and ideas, you should find that your content becomes significantly more compelling and persuasive, and in the process get much better bang for your buck from the time and effort you're putting into creating it. Finally, if you want a really efficient way to produce content and gain meaningful traction a little bit quicker, check out this video next, where I walk you through something called straight line content. Thanks so much for watching this one though. I hope it's been useful, and I will see you in the next one.